What Shannon and I are here to talk to you about is PDF UA as a means to Section 508 compliance. Basically we'll walk through who needs accessibility, how a blind person or a person with disabilities reads a PDF file, what makes a document accessible, then cover off what is WCAG 2.0, and then what is PDF UA and how that all works. Just before we start, we had a piece of collateral in the bags. If anyone needs a Braille or large print version, we have those available, so just see one of us and we'll be able to provide that to you. So to kick it off, I'm just going to hand it over to Shannon.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So just by a show of hands, how many in here are with federal agencies? Anyone? A couple? Okay. And again, just with a show of hands, how many are really familiar with Section 508? And last question, how Section 508 is applicable to PDF documents? Okay, so the group got a little bit smaller as we go along. That helps me understand kind of the audience that we're talking with today. So a couple of quick stats. I'm going to stay on this side. So a couple of quick stats that we talk about accessibility, and Bruno did a great job of kind of setting the stage for the PDF UA format. But in the U.S. alone, we have more than 56 million people with disabilities. When we think about disabilities, I always like to set the stage here that disabilities are pretty inclusive. They could be physical, mobility, could be cognitive and learning, speech, hearing, vision. And then I like to add to that today we have an enormous population of people who are aging, and we're living longer, and we're seeing other age-related type disorders that are really affecting how people specifically interact with digital content today. So when we talk specifically about vision loss, out of that 56 million people, we have a little more than 20 million people who have some form of visual disability. That's not just blindness, and a lot of people think, well, if you've got a vision problem, you're either blind or not blind. It could be simply reading glasses, could be a visual disability. But then we also have things that are a bit more obscure, like print disabilities. So people who have dyslexia have a very difficult time reading print. We have low vision. People have a real challenge with things like contrast and color blindness. I am one of those people. I am sighted, but I'm only sighted in one eye. And in the eye that I'm sighted in, I struggle with a print disability because I also have MS. So my brain receives the image at a delayed rate than what a person with good sight does. So therefore, I have become part of this community of people who rely on assistive technology to be able to interact with digital data. And why that's important is because the way we do business today, whether you're a federal agency or a private organization, you're shifting your customers and your recipients and your constituents to the web. And you're pushing those customers to interact with you digitally. So you have websites where you have your PDFs posted, and now we look at major PDF document generators like federal agencies and like some of the larger organizations where you're pushing out very high volumes of PDFs. And those very high volumes of PDFs oftentimes could be personalized statements, tax notices, health benefits, bank statements, those types of things, all using the PDF format. The challenge here is that this community that I am part of, and many of you may be part of that as well, that are embracing technology, are embracing that screen reader type technology, which helps us interact with that data. So what's happening is all of these components start to converge. We see that people who are using assistive technologies, who are being forced to interact with your organizations digitally, suddenly can't access that data. Now we're talking about being able to make critical decisions about services you're getting from the government or about your banking information, because the PDF is a very prevalent format for delivering that type of content. As a result of that, we are starting to see more and more lawsuits. So when we talk about compliance,
The type of compliance we're talking about here today with Section 508 is plaintiff-driven. That's how that is enforced. So the only way that an organization gets in trouble for being non-508 compliant is because someone brings about some sort of legal activity towards that organization. This is very, very real. These lawsuits started in the early 90s, and towards the late 90s and early 2000s, we start to see those lawsuits affecting both private industry and federal government, specifically for web and web content, of which your PDF documents fall into that category. So move on to the next one here. So when we look at how we deliver content to people who have visual disabilities, most of us think about the traditional formats, Braille, large print. We even see audio becoming more and more available now, as well as an accessible PDF. The challenge is that Braille, large print, and audio are not delivered to your entire organization. They're generally done as an accommodation. However, that PDF is delivered to your entire organization or your entire customer base. The challenge with the first three formats, and those could be preferences, because not everybody is going to require an accessible PDF, especially our aging population who doesn't know how to read Braille. The challenge is that those formats generally take a longer time to deliver, and the recipient now doesn't have the same equivalent opportunities as those who don't require that special format because they have to wait for it. So the real challenge with PDF that the PDF UA is really helping to solve today is that in order to give them a PDF that is accessible, it requires manual work, manual remediation of the tags. Again, the big challenge here is super high volume. Manual remediation simply doesn't scale when you're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, millions, or tens of millions of PDFs that are delivered sometimes on a regular basis each month. So, next slide, Jeff. So I wanted to outline just again real quickly what some of the legislative drivers are around what we're talking about here. So Section 508, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, is part of the Rehabilitation Act. It was amended in '98 to include electronic and information technology. It is a mandate for federal government that says if you procure it, you develop it, you use it, or you maintain it, it must meet those standards to be accessible for people with disabilities. Interestingly enough, federal government's the largest procurer of technology, and those standards have been forced out onto private industry. If they want to sell their product or deliver documents to the federal government, it's got to meet Section 508. So that's essentially the federal government. When you look outside of federal government, now you're looking at things that are governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA under Title II is really covering state and local governments. There was a piece of legislation updated very recently that now requires those state and federal or state and local agencies to have their web and web content accessible. Title III is still a pending amendment that has not been passed yet, but the idea is that that is going to require public accommodation, or those that qualify as public accommodation, to cover internet, web, and web content. Currently, the Department of Justice already agrees that in the spirit of the ADA, the internet is covered, and that's been pretty evident with some of the laws, legal cases that we've seen. So, what makes a document accessible? Anyone in here? I see a couple of people kind of nodding. Anyone have experience tagging, manually tagging a document? Okay. Oh, excellent. Yeah. Okay, good. So a lot of times, for those of you, again, that didn't raise your hand, a lot of times people ask me, how exactly does a blind person read a document, right? So we heard references to screen reader technology. So essentially, a screen reader is a piece of software that's resident on your desktop, at the desktop level, and it allows a person who does not see to audibly hear the commands and digital data that's otherwise visually displayed. A lot of times people think that a screen reader is just simply you push the button and it's going to read to you what's on the page. It's not necessarily about reading it out loud per se, it's about navigation. So imagine if you were reading a 10-page document and you wanted to go back and reference something on page 2 without being able to hop directly to page 2 and hop to where you had that piece of information. It could be very difficult to really digest that information. So it allows people to visually navigate. And again, someone earlier had talked about things like headings on a page. We know they're headings if you look at it because it's a little bit bigger and bolder, but if you couldn't see that it was bigger and bolder, there has to be something to identify that as a heading. So screen reader type software allows for that to happen. The key is that the screen reader is only going to work when you have documents that are formatted to accessibility standards that allow that screen reader to be compatible with it. So when you look at what accessible documents really are, again, thinking things like headings, thinking things like images and things that are non-textual that need to have some data associated with them to describe what that is a picture of. Thinking of tables, and I'm not picking on federal government, but nobody creates more complicated tables than federal government, right? And we see sometimes it's difficult to navigate when we can see what we're looking at, but having the ability to associate column headers and row headers with its associated data field is really important. So having an accessible PDF requires that the accessibility tagging identifies all of those things properly. And I like to suggest that it's not just a tagged versus an untagged. Tagged does not always equal accessible. You could have a poorly tagged document that doesn't convey that information the way it's intended. So it's important to have it tagged properly. And if we move to this last one. So we'll take a couple of seconds to really look at what that means in terms of tagging the document properly and how the PDF UA really supports that, which is what Jeff is going to go into. So firstly, if you have an accessible document, it doesn't visually look any different than a non-accessible document. So a PDF UA format looks the same because the image layer is exactly the same. The area that we're really focusing on is the tag structure that's underneath of that image layer. That tag structure is what connects into and is compatible with the assistive technology. So when you're creating accessible documents, and I'm going to let Jeff is going to be talking about how the PDF UA format supports that. We consider the WCAG standards, which Jeff will also dive into. WCAG 2.0 at a level AA is what you should be looking at in order to have a good usable document. So A, you're going to have all the right markup underneath, which the PDF UA supports. And B, you want to try to get a WCAG 2.0 at a level AA so that you can have a document that's not only accessible but navigable and fully usable. So with that, I'm going to swap places with Jeff and let him dive into the details with you.
Okay. All right, so we're going to touch on WCAG 2.0 first because that really is the definition of how you implement accessibility. So who here is familiar with the WCAG 2 standard? Okay, a good fair amount of people. So what WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines published by the W3C. Basically, what it is a set of guidelines that explain how you can make web content accessible. So why are we talking here about web content at PDF Day? Well, because PDFs are generally used to be posted to websites and convey information via electronic channels, there's a sort of mapping between WCAG and PDF UA. So AIM did a paper on how you can do that mapping. Now the mapping is not necessarily one-to-one, so there is human intervention that needs to take place, and I'll cover that. Another thing about WCAG, it's continually evolving, evolving, excuse my tongue. So we had WCAG 1.0 originally published. 2008, we had WCAG 2.0 published. And over time, that's going to be updated and reflected as new standards come out, new technologies available to keep it current with the landscape. Most of all accessibility requirements, standards, laws, and regulations, as Shannon mentioned, have a WCAG 2.0 level AA requirement. So most of those then, things like Section 508, are going to be relying on WCAG 2 for the baseline accessibility suggestions. So it's also a wide range of recommendations. So WCAG is not necessarily a de facto standard or de facto instruction guide on how you create accessible content. It's basically written as these testable statements that allow software vendors to actually go through and do testing against it. You may be familiar with Adobe Acrobat Pro. When you're doing full accessibility checks, you can check against Section 508, you can check against WCAG 2.0 and get a report back to say how those individual elements related to the testable statements, for example, within WCAG 2.0. Now, WCAG 2 is broken down into 4 top-level principles, which I'll show in a second. There's 12 guidelines within those 4 top-level principles, and there's success criteria within each one of those guidelines. And basically, the individual guidelines have testable statements for all 3 of the conformance levels. Level A, which is the lowest set of accessibility requirements. AA, which is really what people strive to get on websites, what they're required to get in their web and electronic information. And then there's AAA, which is the most strict and the most stringent. So there we go. I'm already halfway through the slide. So each one has those individual levels. So for example, guideline 1.4 it contains 2 level A criteria. It contains 3 level triple or double A criteria and 4 AAA criteria. So these are all compounded. So in order to hit a AAA, you actually need to meet all 9 of these criteria. So with the AA criteria, you only are required to test correctly against 5 of them. Now, I believe the slides are going to be made available. There's some links in here for additional information, plus a resource list at the end of the slide. But you can actually go to the w3.org. You can look at how WCAG 2 applies to various electronic formats, PDF being one of them, and it'll strip down the list of all of the principles and criteria as they relate to specific technologies such as HTML, PDF, or others. So what are the principles? Well, the first principle is that content be perceivable, that information and user interface components must be presented to users in ways that they can be perceived. And that comes down to, it's not just, as Shannon mentioned, just the blind looking at screen readers. You're going to have to look at things like layouts of web pages, make sure buttons aren't too close together for people that have mobility restrictions, etc. User interface components and navigation must be operable. That is principle number 2. So any interfaces you have, people must be able to operate with. Information that's presented has to be understandable. So you think about cognitive disorders here or dyslexia. You need to provide content in a way that it's understandable to persons with disabilities. And finally, robustness. So content has to be robust enough that it can be interpreted easily by a number of user agents, including assistive technology. And as Shannon mentioned, mostly what we see is read aloud technology or screen readers. All right, so you've heard about PDF UA in the previous session, so I'll go a little quicker through this portion, but it's been published as a standard in 2012, but as Duff mentioned earlier, it's been worked on since 2005. So it's meant to provide a clear normative terms of achieving accessibility within the PDF format. So it's a companion to PDF or the PDF spec, and it's really giving vendors code level requirements for being able to develop PDF writing and processing software, as well as those people who are developing assistive technology to be able to read and understand the contents of PDF. So it's broken down into 3 key sections. Section 5 is the file format itself, which is above and beyond what's in the ISO 3200 PDF spec. Section 8 is dedicated to reader software. How is reader software meant to react as it hits certain tags? So it's giving the real success criteria of saying, if you encounter this tag, this is the intended outcome. And Section 9 is dedicated at assistive technology, how it's meant to react to the various tags that are implemented within the PDF UA. So PDF UA and WCAG 2 are complementary, but conformance with one does not necessarily guarantee conformance with the other. As Matt May from Adobe, a accessibility evangelist, said, PDF UA makes certain that the PDF format isn't the source of the accessibility problems. So here's a sample of a very rare IRS statement that has a refund on it. There's no tags in this document, and when JAWS opens this, it's going to say no document available, because to JAWS, it's blind. And to someone who cannot see the document using assistive technology, it doesn't exist. When implemented in the PDF UA format, you have the document itself, whose is rendered exactly the same as a non-tagged PDF, but now you have the information that JAWS can see. And if JAWS can see it, it can relay that to the person who's using assistive technology, and they can fully interact and use the document that's presented to them. So in order to implement PDF UA, there's a bunch of structure that you need to apply, things like properties and appropriate fonts, language specifications, tab and reading order. But one of the bigger problems is images and alt text. So you need to make sure that, as mentioned earlier with that spider graph, that you're providing alternate text or actual text for an image that is clear and understandable when it's read aloud by assistive technology. Because saying this is a spider graph that has a few lines and going all over the place isn't clear and understandable when somebody who can see can actually visually use that information effectively. So basically, if you've implemented PDF UA properly, if you've taken the WCAG recommendations into account, and one of the things I just want to sort of cover here, if you look at PDF UA, it does not specify. You can pass PDF UA if an image is tagged and you have the alternate text tag there. But there's no coverage in there to say we have appropriate alternate text that accurately describes that image. So there is a human element there that needs to validate and ensure that the content that's going into creating the PDF is usable for people with assistive technology or leveraging assistive technology. So the last item that I wanted to cover, who here is familiar with the Matterhorn protocol? Okay, about the same as PDF or WCAG. So what the PDF Association did was they took the PDF UA spec and decided to try to make it easier to automate the checking and easier for vendors who are doing PDF readers or people that are generating PDF UA output, make it easier for them to check and conform to the various checkpoints that are implemented both in WCAG and within PDF UA. So the Matterhorn protocol consists of 31 checkpoints, and there's a total of 136 failure conditions. So there's certain technology out there, such as the PAC2 checker, that will go against the Matterhorn protocol, look at everything within that PDF, and validate that all of those failure conditions effectively are not met, that you do not fail any of those conditions. And it really helps PDF producers and the vendors creating PDF readers to automate many of the aspects that previously would be interpreted from the specification or interpreted from WCAG. Now there's a set of criteria that you can validate against that's accepted within the community. So basically, organizations committed to providing electronic documents can use this as a cost-effective way to make sure that the output that they're creating is indeed PDF UA. Now, PDF UA is really the best way to put it. It's the format, it's the bucket, and anything that goes into PDF UA is the WCAG 2 compliant stuff. So PDF UA effectively here is keeping up with the theme, the envelope, the accessible envelope, and what the content that goes in it is what needs to be WCAG 2.0 compliant. So there's the additional resources. I encourage you to go take a look, get a better understanding on the WCAG and the standards, but at this point, we'll take any questions. Yes?
Do you know if there's any compatibility issues with PDFA 1 to 3 and the UA standard, or can you implement both on the same document?
You can definitely implement both on the same document. In fact, the PDF UA standard inherits a good portion, if not most, of the PDFA requirements. Yes?
Ignoring the acceptability of the alt text, if you're PDF UA compliant, are you generally also Section 508 compliant?
For the most part, well, there's more to it than just the alt text. So, you know, reading order, for example, is something that, you know, you open up Adobe Acrobat Pro, it goes through and assigns a reading order to the best of its algorithms, but that doesn't mean that the information that is being presented in, or the reading order that's being presented is what was intended. So for example, if I have page 1 of 3 and it's down at the bottom right-hand corner, I probably don't want to read page 1 of 3 as soon as I've read everything left, right, top, down. So for WCAG, you're probably needing to adjust reading order. That's just one example there. But if you're PDF UA compliant, then you're a good portion of the way there for the WCAG. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Mine was really around, was your question around WCAG compliant or 508 compliant?
Either meaning like if I'm going to develop software that I want to be Section 508 compliant, if I look at PDF UA and I just WCAG, do I need to also look at Section 508, the things that aren't covered in those standards that well, still not 508 compliant because these other things that aren't covered by PDF UA?
Yeah, so if you're developing software and you want to sell the software and the software meet 508 compliance, that's one bucket of rules. If you're looking at generating output and providing that output as a PDF and having that PDF be accessible to 508 standards, 508 is a little tricky because the Rehabilitation Act was amended in '98. We didn't have the same kind of technology that we have today, and so it's a little bit outdated because it actually still points back to WCAG 1.0. However, under 1194.22, which is essentially the web component of accessibility for 508, it's kind of the square peg round hole combination right now where PDFs are kind of floating against the requirements for web under Section 508. but it's generally, and each agency currently, each federal agency can certainly determine their own level of compliance to 508 when it comes to documents. However, for a very long time now, there has been some efforts to refresh Section 508, and we're referring to it affectionately as the ICT refresh. There are some very specific categories in there that are not in the refresh, that are not currently in 508 as it is today. So as a general practice, if your document conforms to WCAG 2.0, generally it will conform to 508 as well, if that answers your question. Yeah, sure. Any others?
Great. Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.